Hello, class. Let's talk about John Updike's A&P. One of the questions that I asked was whether Sammy was a hero or a fool. We're going to investigate that throughout the story and kind of figure out why he says that final line that life is going to be difficult for him from this point on. So let's begin. One of the things we know about this story is he is explaining it after it already happened. So this could be, maybe 50 years from now. It could be a couple of days after this incident happened. I would argue that it is relatively soon after this happened because of all the details that he's able to remember. And we get lines like this one, which shows the immaturity of the narrator. This is when the girls first enter the supermarket. The one that caught my eye first was the one in the plaid green two-piece. She was a chunky kid with a good tan and a sweet, broad, soft-looking can with those two crescents of white just under it, where the sun never seems to hit, at the top of the backs of her legs. So this is more of a description from, maybe a 19-year-old, maybe a little bit older like Stokesy is, but we don't see that maturity of an adult here. So it's probably a story told soon after this actually happened. What's interesting is we start to see what the message is just from this description and the next description. What we're seeing is really a clash of generations. Sammy is rebelling against Langle and Langle's generation. Langle is friends with his family, so maybe about the same age as his parents. Langle is focused on policy, on rules, and Sammy is really rebelling against those rules. So he's rebelling against the generation that's come before him. We see this in the way that he describes one of the girls that has come in and contrasts her with somebody from the generation before him. The woman in his checkout line is, he says, about 50. So this is that previous generation. And he says she's one of these cash register watchers, a witch, about 50, with rouge on her cheekbones and no eyebrows. I know it made her day to trip me up. So he's setting up this contrast between youth that has come into the grocery store and this older generation that watches the rules very carefully and likes to put down the younger generation. In addition to this contrast in generations, we also see this contrast in class. Sammy is realizing that Queenie is somebody that is not obtainable to him. She is out of his league or out of his class. We look at the way that he describes the other two girls compared to Queenie. There was this chunky one with the two-piece. It was bright green and the seams on the bra were still sharp and her belly was still pretty pale, so I guess she just got it, the suit. There was this one with one of those chubby berry faces, the lips all bunched together under her nose. This one and a tall one with black hair that hadn't quite frizzed right, and one of these sunburns right across the eyes, and a chin that was too long. You know, the kind of girl other girls think is very striking and attractive, but never quite makes it, as they very well know, which is why they like her so much. So he's classifying these two girls as maybe somebody that is beneath him or beneath his standards, somebody that would maybe be appreciative if he asked them out. This is different than the third girl, who he calls Queenie. So he sees her as a queen of some sort of, she's regal, she's composed. She didn't look around, not this queen. She just walked straight on slowly on these long white prima donna legs. This is his definition of perfection. This is what he aspires for in a romantic partner. We then get further description a little later on. With the straps pushed off, there was nothing between the top of the suit and the top of the head except just her. This clean, bare plane of the top of her chest down from the shoulder bones like a dented sheet of metal tilted in the light. I mean, it was more than pretty. So he's really bringing her up, and she is rising above his status here. Now, one of the things that Sammy struggles with is he is seeing this beauty come into the grocery store, and yet the other generation, the older generation, doesn't appreciate that beauty. They don't stand in awe like he does. This is shown in the following passage. The sheep, which is the older generation, the other shoppers in the AandP, pushing their carts down the aisle, the girls walking against the usual traffic. Not that we have one-way signs or anything. So the girls are walking against that generation. Were pretty hilarious. You could see them when Queenie's white shoulders dawned on them, kind of jerk or hop or hiccup, but their eyes snapped back to their own baskets and on they pushed. I bet you could set off dynamite in an AandP, and the people would, by and large, keep reaching and checking oatmeal off their lists and muttering. So they notice this beauty, but they are unaffected by it. They don't acknowledge it the way that he does. There's really this clash between those generations going on here. Then we get another comparison here, and that is between Sammy and Stokesy. So Stokesy is a part of Sammy's generation, but we can see that Stokesy is aiming up. He's aiming towards that upper generation, whereas Sammy is trying to rebel against it. Is it done? He asks. So this is Stokesy, the responsible married man finding his voice. So we see he's trying to be responsible. He's married. He's doing the things that the previous generation did. I forgot to say he thinks he's going to be manager some sunny day, maybe in 1990 when it's called the Great Alexandrov and Petrushki Tea Company or something. What he's saying here is that Stokesy is following the rules. He's following the policy and the guidelines of a life that the previous generation said you should live. You should be responsible, you should have a good job, you should raise a family. Sammy is going to rebel against this, and that's what's going to lead to some of those final conclusions that he makes. I also think it's interesting that Sammy, especially in the way he describes the other two girls, is pretty crass and crude. He really objectifies them, but he doesn't like it when the older generation does this. He doesn't like it when the girls go to the meat department and talk to McMahon. And Sammy says, all that was left for us to see was old McMahon patting his mouth and looking after them, sizing up their joints. Poor kids. I began to feel sorry for them. They couldn't help it. And so he doesn't like it when that generation objectifies these women, probably especially Queenie, who he considers above himself even. And then we get to this part of the story, and I think this is interesting. He says, now here comes the sad part of the story. At least my family says it's sad, but I don't think it's so sad myself. Even though he quits his job at the end and doesn't get rewarded for quitting his job, doesn't get the recognition from these girls, he doesn't regret it. He's still saying this is not the sad part to him. In thinking of this foolishness, he doesn't consider that action to be foolish. He still believes that it is noble. Why does he believe it's noble? We're going to get to that as we look at this difference in the generations. So while the girls are walking around the store, he is delighting in this beauty. He is affected by it. But then he says, then everybody's luck begins to run out. So again, the older generation starts to come in with their policy, with their rules, and it ruins this rebelliousness that he wants. Then to go back to this elevation of Queenie over his status, she speaks, and he says, all of a sudden I slid right down her voice into her living room. So he's picturing this scene in her living room with these herring snacks. Her father and the other men were standing around in ice cream coats and bow ties, and the women were in sandals, picking up herring snacks on toothpicks off a big glass plate, and they're all holding drinks the color of water with olives and sprigs of mint in them. So he sees them at this fancy party having these herring snacks, wearing bow ties, which you'll notice he discards the bow tie as he quits, and he makes sure the audience knows that was not my bow tie, that was theirs. So he's picturing her parents having this soiree that is really fancy and upper class. Then he contrasts it with his own parents. When my parents have somebody over, they get lemonade. And if it's a real racy affair, Schlitz in tall glasses with "they'll do it every time" cartoons stenciled on. He's not only contrasting the generation with the older generation, but he's contrasting Queenie as this upper class compared to his lower class. She's out of his reach, out of his depth. Then we get this part where Langle confronts the girls, especially Queenie, and he says, "We want you decently dressed." So he's accusing them of not being decent. "We are decent," Queenie says suddenly, her lower lip pushing, getting sore now that she remembers her place. I think this is what really upsets Sammy is he has put her at this higher station or this upper class, and Langle is calling her indecent. He's lowering her. And Sammy takes great offense of this as this different generation mocking what he perceives to be the highest beauty of his generation. This is shown in the statement about policy. So again, Sammy is rebelling against that generation, rebelling against their policy. And after Langle states that this is their policy, he says he turns his back. So Langle, that older generation, turns its back on the younger generation. That's policy for you. Policy is what the kingpins want. What the others want is juvenile delinquency. So he wants to rebel. He wants to show that his generation is the one that's coming up, and there is beauty in his generation. Then we get this interaction between he and Queenie, which he says, "I uncrease the bill tenderly, as you may imagine, it just having come from between the two smoothest scoops of vanilla I'd ever known there were, and pass a half and a penny into her narrow pink palm, and nestle the herrings in a bag, and twist its neck and hand it over." He is doing this contemplatively. He's doing this very carefully, maybe to extend the moment with Queenie, but we get a lot in this very last part, all the time thinking. So he's trying to make sense of what has just happened here. He's trying to make sense of this conflict between generations, this conflict between classes. He's trying to figure out his place in all of this. So he quits. And this is really where he's starting to realize that life is going to be difficult for him because he says, "It seems to me that once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to go through with it." He has to continue this rebelliousness. Otherwise, he's going to end up like Stokesy. He's going to end up working at the AandP until he himself is manager. And he doesn't want that life. And it's funny because then we get this line by Langle, which I think is meant to be an admonishment, but really it's wisdom. "You'll feel this for the rest of your life," Langle says. And I know that's true. It's like he knows that he's never going to fit in with that older generation. He knows that there's always going to be this conflict between them. But remembering how he made that pretty girl blush makes me so scrunchy inside. He feels deeply that what Langle did was wrong. Makes him scrunchy inside. It doesn't adhere to his view of Queenie and who she is and what she represents, the best of his generation. This is finally acknowledged in this last scene, which is a contrast between he and Langle. His face was dark gray and his back stiff. This is that older generation, as if he's just had an injection of iron. And my stomach kind of fell as I felt how hard the world was going to be to me hereafter. So he didn't get the girls, they had already left, but he sees this contrast between Langle, who is stiff, who is policy, who is rigid, and himself. And he realizes the world's going to be difficult because I am going to try to attack this older generation and to rebel against it. And it's not going to be kind in doing so. It is rigid and stiff, and it's always going to be trying to impose its policy and its lifestyle on him. This is what I take from the short story. I am now somebody in the older generation, and I remember what it's like to be 19, so I can really relate to this. I hope you enjoyed it and the future stories we have coming up.